Hello and welcome to the DM's Travel Book Club, a guide to the planes. Each episode we explore one of the planes of existence as outlined in the Great Wheel Cosmology in the role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons. With me, as always, is my co-host Hamilton. Hi Hamilton, how are you?
Hi Fiona, how are you?
I'm good now. I'm good that I've now got... Even though we've done this 4 times, I still don't get the intro right. But that's okay. That's okay.
It's fine. It's fine. You did very well.
Fine.
You did very well.
You.
Yeah, it's a good read. It was a good read.
It's a good read.
How are you doing generally? Are you doing well this week?
Overall, really well. You know, just life in general. I think the last couple of years has been quite a pandemic, so we've just been like, whoa, so all in and out essentially. So, but I'm okay myself.
Pandemics and panda style things. Where are we going to this week, Fiona?
Where are we going to this week? So today we are exploring the plane of Pandemonium, this sort of the howling winds of Pandemonium, this idea of uproar and commotion. This is a plane that sort of lies in between Limbo and the Abyss, which we've already covered. And it's the idea, also the brief of it is like, imagine a plane, like a huge big rock essentially, sort of drilled out or sort of riddled with these different sized tunnels, and the soundscape is the main sort of defining feature, right? It is as if every howling man in existence was crammed into this place, but you can't see where it's coming from. This awful wind blowing through and causing madness in anyone that visits there. So that's the plane we're looking at today.
Yeah. It's quite... I really enjoyed it. I really like this plane. As I've said many a time to you. I think the ingenuity of the plane as an idea is actually really great, because my guess is that they probably started with madness as a theme, and then they tried to think of things that would be very not definitively obvious forms of how that might occur, because but then again makes so much sense. So this idea of an ever droning wind, noise is something that is, as podcasters, we know how important noise and sound quality can be over audio, like visual quality and stuff like that. Yeah. So, but having we all have had that bird who won't shut up at 4:00 in the morning in the summertime.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And how irritating that, or like a car alarm, and how those sorts of things can send you quite easily to a very subtle version of madness, like that sort of very easily set you off, as one might say. And if you get flooded with noise as well, like I've heard that term, you can become very agitated quite easily. If you're in a busy environment and then someone asks you a question, and I know this from my mind flare athletics, if you put a lot of information at people audially, your brain just cannot process. And so I think it's... I think they've made a very good... I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's something that you can really... Again, like a lot of these things that they've made, something that you can... Even though it may be very high concept, there is still something at the root of it which is very emotional and attachable to you that you can do. So that's kind of what I felt about this one.
I completely agree. And it's interesting that, again, as we sort of said, the unique selling point of Pandemonium is this idea of noise, right? Compared to previous... episodes where we looked at stuff like the Abyss, which is just it's just all this horrible imagery, stuff like like I said to you, I sometimes I can't even visualize because it's described in such a way, and I love it when it's over described because you just I can't compute that. Whereas here it is just a rock, it is dark, it is windy, and you're by yourself, and it's just the soundscape. And what I really loved, the first thing I'm going to sort of talk about is that there's a lot of advice in this particular chapter in the Planes of Chaos book, which talks about how would you play this, and we'll get on to sort of the madness element in a second, but it does say or recommends or encourages that you play the sounds of winds as you're playing, even at a low quality or really loud and stuff like that, to really enhance the game session. Now obviously if you're doing it online, maybe not great, because you wouldn't be able to get across, and obviously as we know from certain conference call stuff, any sort of lot of noise, it's very hard to compute anyway. But it's an in-person thing, it's an immersion thing. I can totally imagine that being amazing, having the lights down dark and everything like that, just to really emphasize
this really subtle noise, like a sort of sound.
Really...
If that was picked up by the mic at all.
It wasn't on my end, but I'm sure it will be in post. But yeah, so this is the other thing as well. as we sort of described it, it's a huge big rock riddled with all these tunnels, and the tunnels, they vary in size. They could be really, really small, so only you can just about crawl through, or they could be vast and huge, like, you know, they could be like span several miles across. But that doesn't necessarily have a direct relationship or correlation to the wind itself. So yeah, it could literally be just a quiet breeze in this huge gargantuan sort of tunnel, or it could be like hurricane level whipping past you as you're so tight in sort of a crawl space. Like I'm thinking the Descent kind of level, you know, that horror. Yes, we're all about those female potholers. What a horror film that is! It's a great horror film, but it made me laugh as a pitch. Like, you know what women love? Going underground, and they're like, no, we don't. No, we don't at all. And it's such a niche reference.
Described that way, but that's quite a funny way of putting it. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a really interesting pitch, I think. Yeah. But anyway, I think overall, this idea, like you were saying, the overarching sort of like sounds, that overwhelming stuff of noise, but not having anything visually, is very different to the other planes we've discussed. So I was like, oh, it's flipped it on its head slightly as well. So let's talk about geography. So as we've sort of said several times now, it is a giant rock with tunnels all the way through it. And these tunnels vary in different sizes. We've got some that are just literally crawl spaces, some that are as wide as huge caverns and can stretch for several miles across. But what's interesting is that there's no correlation between the wind aspect. So the wind could be like a gentle summer's breeze as you're going through these massive caverns, or it could be like proper hurricane style, like any of the storms we've had recently in the UK. It could be that speed whilst you're going through. And I quite like that as an image, because it just doesn't make sense. You think, well, surely it's going to be like proper hurricane season or storm weather in massive open spaces. If it's in a tighter space, it's actually quite scary, I think, for the player characters.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I really found really interesting is gravity in this place.
Yeah.
So gravity, it talks about it being orientated to where the soul is closest in proximity. So technically, you could be walking along the ground, go next to the wall, then start to walk on the wall, then Pippi Longstocking style go on a ceiling.
Oh yeah, okay. I was thinking Matrix style, but yeah, definitely.
Okay, yeah. I see where we've both gone with this. Two separate places. But yeah, so that's quite interesting. The idea that you can get around, or maybe for whatever reason there's a huge crack in the ground, but you can get up over it by sort of doing your own sort of corkscrew sort of journey around, which, again, it says makes combat very interesting. So, for example, if you're shooting any projectiles, why would you? But maybe because you're doing a big fight, these arrows stuff, they're going to be quite useless in the long range, because it will just go to the closest place where the gravity is, which could be up, down.
Now I'm thinking of Inception fight, that sort of fight in the corridor.
Oh my goodness! Of course, Inception fighting. That's exactly what it's going to be. So again, maybe if you're thinking like, if you're trying to do like a big mini map, that'd be quite cool, because then but you'd have to just think about all the logistics for it. But it'd be really cool to play it out.
You want a tombola? You need a tombola. Sorry.
No, for probably American listeners, a tombola is basically a raffle essentially, but it's a big drum. Yeah. I'm sure they have it in bingo halls as well, but I love the fact we call it tombolas and such.
It's a great name.
It is a great name. But yeah, and the other quick things to talk about it, so is another big thing about it is Pandemonium is the place where the river Styx sort of originates from. So again, this idea of this river that goes through all the lower planes and stuff, this river, which we've not actually gone into too much detail about before, but essentially if you touch it at any point, you forget your memories, or you forget your past life, and you forget everything. But here you don't, unless you drink it. Which again, it's foul smelling water as well. And it talks about this idea that people, most people who do live here, those poor wretches that do, have congregated around places that do have safe water. But those who don't, who maybe just arrive, keep drinking from the same water because they keep forgetting it. And I was just like, that's so sad. Oh, horrible.
Which reminds me of that. It reminds me of the Arrested Development thing where he keeps. I don't know if you remember. If you've seen that, when he keeps taking the forget-me-nots, as he calls it, my forget-me-pills, and he keeps like living the same day over and over again.
Yeah, it's probably, for me, it was like 50 First Dates. Again, that just shows you how far we differentiate from our various things. But again, that idea, you could come up with a minor character that your party comes across, and they seem very lovely, but they keep forgetting stuff, or they have a big notebook that says, your name is this, you've been here so many days, and every time they have a drink of water, they just keep forgetting stuff. And it also means they forget stuff like their spells, their skills, and they just become almost like a shell of a person, which scary.
Not great
Not great at all. But also, as well, just to finish up that sort of physical geography of it. So this idea of the water as well, it is affected by gravity too. So again, you can have this corkscrewing sort of water in the center of something, and also having to dodge out the way. But also this idea that it can make your the footing slippery, so more difficult terrain. So if you're running or trying to get past something, suddenly this water sprays up, so you're trying to avoid the water, but at the same time...
Then you end up in Thorpe Park. Slip sliding around.
Sadly, Pandemonium as Thorpe Park. What a great one-shot, spin on that one-shot. Is that
I can imagine, the Witchlight Carnival having a door that opens to a water slide in Pandemonium, and then you come back out again or something like that. Do you know what I mean?
That feels very much like, I can't remember what the feat is. It was a demon where you send people through hell for 10 seconds and then they come back. Yes, it was
the Tiamat throw through Avernus that I liked from Fizzbands,
Yeah, wild ride through Pandemonium.
Exactly.
But it's true, right? I like that idea, because they have it at Thorpe Park, they had the Saw ride, don't they, where it sort of goes up and then goes down and comes back up again. Or exactly. Oblivion at Alton Towers.
Yeah,
we're just really reading off UK theme parks, guys.
Water rapids, the rapids that they have.
The rapids. The rapids would be a good one, actually. Yeah, quite like that. Anyway, I think
if they need to make a D&D carnival, theme park, we're down for this.
Throughout all of the Outer Planes, we have themed...
The River Styx would be a great ride, which should go through all
dangerous.
of them. Yeah, exactly.
All I'm saying
so good you might forget yourself.
So good you forget everything. But I also like the idea that any of the ticket holders are going to be Modrons.
Yes. Yes.
You're not this.
No, when it breaks down. Modron. That'd be so great.
Modron.
Going on.
We'll have to come to Modrons when we get to Meccana's. But anyway, yes. So I just like this idea that if you're doing a big battle map of Pandemonium, or you're thinking about combat or anything like that, you have to take in the physical elements. It's not just that soundscape, which is obviously is the key thing, but the idea that it is slippery, it's difficult terrain, and if you're trying to get away from something, which you're most likely trying to get away from the wind or trying to get to a safe space, it's not that easy. Not that easy at all.
It is not. And actually, just to finalise on the geography, like a lot of the other planes, this has levels, layers. Mm-hmm. There are 3 layers, if I'm correct in that. 4 layers. Oh, bugger! That's why you're the leader. That's why
I'm hosting this one, even though you're the more passionate about it. So I believe we have I believe we have Desmos
Linum.
Oh no, that's now an NPC happening there. Then we've got, I believe it's Cositus, the layer of lamentation. And
that's not how I said it, but I believe that's probably how it is said. I'm glad you said it.
As we know about DM's book club and DM's travel book club, pronunciation is not our strong suit, and we're happy about that. I want that on a t-shirt.
Exactly, yeah.
And then this is the one I definitely can't get. I believe it's Phlegetton?
Phlegetton.
And then
Agathion.
There are 4 planes.
There are 4 layers of planes.
And as I think you're about to say, they're all very similar in the sense of they are rock. There's lots of wind going through it, and the top one, Pandesmos, is the most populated. But as you get further down, it becomes more rock-like, more sort of concentrated and more intense as you go down, and with the darkness as well. Because again, this whole place is completely dark. There's no natural sources of light. No. Which is, and of course with the winds, another key thing here is that if you've got a torch, the winds are just going to blow them out. And you're like, well, it's okay, we've got magical light. You're like, yes, the person that has the torch at midnight on the top of the hill, you know exactly where they are. You're the only person who's got light. Oh no.
Yes.
So you are, if you're using magical light or lighting your way through some sort of magical cantrip, you are going to be seen, which I thought was so good.
I really do like that. Like our player Chloe, who, when we were fighting mosquitoes, decided to cast light on their weapon. And I was like, is that a good idea? And they were like, nope. I was like, no, that wasn't a good idea. So they literally had everyone converge on them.
I love that. The mosquitoes and instantly, what's that noise? It's the big moth coming over.
Yeah, exactly. Light.
Fantastic. But yeah, so sorry, I interrupted you with correcting you that there was 4 players instead of 3. What were you going to say?
I was literally going to say what you said about them, really, that there's 4 of them, and they are distinctive enough, and you literally point out that what they basically just get more rocky to Agathion is has no connections between any of its rocky in its outcrops and its openings. It's just literally a wholly cheese without any connection between them.
Again, this is where our minds differ. I was thinking of an aerobar.
Yeah, an aerobar is a great shout, actually, or whisper, or whichever.
Oh, a whisper. Oh no, I want a whisper now. Anyway, that's UK chocolate bars. We're doing all the references in this episode. But yeah, I think that Agathion's really interesting because of the bubble stuff. Because I think we talked about it off podcast, that the idea that they're so impenetrable, they're so hard to get to. What could possibly be in there? It could be magical loots or a cache of a god. So again, a great adventure hook just to go in and try and get it.
Dragon somewhere. They mention a dragon, don't they?
So I believe that's on the third level. This idea that there possibly could be dragons, but they're dragons that are much bigger than any on the material plane. And it's like, could you imagine fighting any dragon in this Pandemonium setting with the winds?
I'm imagining that T-Rex running at you. You know, that sort of head low, big legs thumping behind, down this tunnel at you, like, oh, crap.
Yeah. Because they wouldn't. I love the idea that they had wings, but because they've gone mad, they've sort of torn it out because they can't use them at all. So it's almost like spindly, like
really massive ostriches or something like that. Like kiwi birds, like a dangerous kiwi bird. Yeah.
Obviously, but more frightening than that, obviously. But yes.
It's quite frightening, I'll tell you that.
It is quite frightening. They also sort of mentions, again, with these layers, again, we sort of quickly mentioned about the light, but the idea that the further down you go, the darker it gets. This idea that the light is leached out by the rocks completely, and the gravity then does become a bit more central, so there's more sort of, it's always in one direction the further you go down. So, I just thought
Can I guess which one was your favourite description of a layer?
Okay, go for it.
Can I imagine it was Cositus or whatever it is? Because it's called the Layer of Lamentation. Yeah. And that's because the whole blamed layer sounds like a wailing session of the most mournful bunch of funeral attendees a basher could imagine. So, is that your favourite one?
It is kind of my favourite
yes!
one. Yes!
I'm
so predictable. I'm so predictable. But yeah, it's that sort of thing where it's just eerie in the background. And the level of the noise can go up and down. But imagine, again, as an immersive thing, if you were not a proper DM, that's not the word I'm thinking of, but if you were a DM that's really into the soundscape, I can imagine spending like a good hour going, okay, I'm going to mix the soundscape and now bring up the wailers and then put them down again. Get it all done on Sirenscape or whatever and just have it in the background.
Yeah. It's also got your favourite place, Howler's Crag.
It does have my favourite place, Howler's Crag. So I love this idea. In my head, I imagine it to be like almost like a Stonehenge type thing, or I can't remember the name, but there's a place in Ireland that's something similar where it's just a big rock essentially, and you decided that you can go to it and scream into the winds, and with the hope that if you shout your hometown's name, you will be transported there, which is not true at all. But I love that idea. This habit going, it's just shouting, Manchester!
Take me home!
Take me home to Manchester! And it goes, no. But also, the one I really like is that you can talk to anyone from this place, anyone in Pandemonium, you talk to it, and they will hear you. However, people are more likely to ignore you because they think they're going mad because of the winds. And I just thought, what a cool thing. It's like, you just hear like, be careful of the dragon, it's coming straight for you. No, don't even think about it.
Don't listen to it.
Go away, random person I don't know.
Exactly. Well, as I've talked about, you talked about that Glastonbury tour when I went up, my Infamous, which I've talked about on a few podcasts. I don't know if I talked about it when I went to Glastonbury tour with my friend, and that's when I started getting into D&D, and it was so windy. Like when you jumped on the top, you flew back, sort of thing.
Whoa.
Oh, that is literally Howler's Crag. I remember that. That's very much in my mind. So
yeah,
when it's a windy day, go to Glastonbury tour and you'll know what it's like.
Just know what it's like. Yeah, that idea that if you jump and you go back, that's such a cool image as well. The only final thing I wanted to say about Howler's Crag is that there is possibly, as always, there happens to be a pub nearby, and it's got, I think, hands down, the best name for a pub ever, just called the Laughing Mug. I'm like, I would go to the Laughing Mug. I think that's what a place to go meet your friends at. And there's nothing necessarily special about it per se. I just like that idea that it's just called the Laughing Mug, and it's just next to this
pub name goes such long. There's a pub in Bath called the Pig and Fiddle.
That's a great name.
Isn't that a great name? And it's just was always my favourite pub because it's such a great name, the Pig and Fiddle. Because it's
you know exactly where you're going.
Yeah.
this is clearly a topic for another time, but just talking about good names for places in your town and how to come up with them. Like, obviously, every tavern, because everyone goes, "Oh, you all meet in a tavern. What's it called? Oh, the King's Head, rubbish. The Red Lion, rubbish." But it's like the double-headed unicorn. What? Like,
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah. So let's move on from geography. We're going to ship that out the way, and I'm going to pull on. I don't know if that was right. Population. Now, Hamilton, what do you think the population of this place would be like if given a random guess?
Generally mad.
Yes.
As a first point. Also, people who probably are lost as well. And on top of, that seems to be really much everyone, if you were thinking about it. I know the other people that are there, but I'll leave that to you as our resident Pandemonium specialist.
For now, yes.
But yeah, mad and lost, basically, and hoping to get out, probably, as well.
Pretty much. And that's pretty much it. I think what is really interesting is that people who are here are known as the Banish. I say that's one of the major sort of groups of people. But what's interesting is obviously that it's not like the Banished is the same group of people. It's just people who have been banished here, left, right, and centre, just groups and pockets of resistance per se. So there's no real native races to speak of in Pandemonium itself. It's where people have been banished to, and I thought, ooh, really cool.
Yeah. But it's like the Carceri, which we'll get onto, but for the everyman. Do you know what I mean? It's like the Carceri for everyone, not the
for everyone. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's that idea, if you meet somebody who's said it and they don't remember how long they've been here, again, we'll go into the madness, to the magical conditions in a second, but yeah, it's that sort of thing that there's not, the townships here are, or any sort of thing that's been made here has had to be built here to survive. It's not natural. It's all sort of humanoid made or something like that. But it talks about like what sort of monsters are here. There could be giant snails, slugs, leeches, eels, piranhas. So it's all nasty things that you don't want, essentially. I love that idea again. What's that noise? And you turn around, it's just a massive snail coming down one of the corridors. You're like, oh no! It's just, and of course it's like raw again in my head. Now I've got the T-Rex in my head. It's like as the wind is sort of blowing against it. So those are my favorite things about it. But in terms of sort of deities and powers here, interesting, we sort of briefly mentioned Ysgard or Isgard. That's sort of more Norse mythology, but here it talks about Pandemonium being a place that Loki of the North pantheon
when he's pissed everyone off.
Yeah, when he's pissed everyone off, he's like, I'm just gonna hide out in Pandemonium for a little bit. So this idea that he's got a little bolt hole here, so you could come across the god of mischief there. You've got deities from sort of gnolls, bugbears. You also have the Queen of Air and Darkness from the Unseelie Court. I mean, I was like, oh, she's here too. Excellent. And she has actually, in this book as well, she has a really interesting, again, I knew quite a bit about her, but how she sort of came to be. And again, this imagery of this gem surrounded by sort of a black cloud on a throne. I guess I absolutely love it. It's just very interesting how, like, because you just see the Queen of Air and Darkness, you're like, ooh, what does that mean? And you're like, oh, she's got to that point where she's just not even can't manifest.
There's no physical manifestation. Yeah, she's just a ghostly spirit cool. that is basically centered around this black gem, which is
scary.
I know this is a bit off topic, but it's on topic. But knowing that you're more new to the 2E setting than I am, how are you finding the split of the Fae in the way that the old world does it? Because I like both, because I really like the Feywild, as we very much said on our other show.
Yeah.
But there's something kind of interesting about it not being all in the same plane and having them as like having a very specific realm to them. But I don't know. I'm just interested in what your thoughts are, really.
No, I think this is a good point with all of them. So obviously we talked in Arborea about Arvindor, which was like the home of the elves and that sort of the Feywild. Or like one part of the, because again I've recently read about elves and the sort of the big split they had, big schism where Loth and her followers went obviously to the Abyss, and then the other elves went to the Feywild and stuff, and that was really interesting because I didn't realize there was like a realm per se. And I was like, oh, it's an Arborea, and I was like, that makes so much sense now. So a lot of the stuff I'm reading in 5e has so many roots in like the Planescape and the 2E stuff. I think the thing for me is that because there's such a lot of it, and I know people are going to hate me for this, I'm not a big fan of double columns, and I'm not a fan of lots of information. And when, especially as I'm sure maybe something we're going to talk about with Ysgard, is that once you've seen one town and it's like it's been given a name, but it's like it's very similar to 3 other towns or 3 other realms. It's like that's quite a lot of information, and for me, I guess it's that sort of thing. I'd like simplifying of the information in the sense of like, here's the plane, here's the big details, here's one defining feature or 3 defining features. I don't know, a town, a landmark, and a natural thing or something like that. But I quite enjoyed seeing the different side. Going back to your original question, the different side of the Feywild stuff, because I didn't really know much about either of the courts at all or anything like that. And again, with the bringing of the Wild Beyond the Witchlight, and obviously that's sort of bringing that Feywild stuff back into the foray, as it were, and then finding out, it's got all these roots there. I actually was like, it fills in a lot of stuff, and it actually makes sense. So it doesn't contradict anything per se. No. If anything, it just gives more information. So I'm quite glad I come to it, even though sometimes I do find it a bit overwhelming at times.
I think that's right, and I think that you hit the point there, isn't it? Like the Feywild's like a really nice condensation, is that the word? Condensation?
Yes.
So you can, like, it's taken
an amalgamation there.
Yeah. I think because like what Planescape does, as you said, it's a lot of information. There's 16 planes, and we're going to go through all of them. We're on 4, so we're a quarter of the way through.
Yes.
But with that, I think there's something that's, even though actually I don't think this is necessarily the right way to put it, because I think that it is each realm is diverse, but it is very much like there's a box to a realm sometimes, isn't there? So it's like it's very much got a theme, and everything plays on that theme, and therefore what's quite nice about the Feywild is that it takes a different theme, more of emotion, right, which can be chaotic and can be lawful and can be all these different things, and therefore has something much more akin to reality, which is why they put it like it's next to the material plane. It's like an extreme of the material plane. So I like both ways, but I actually quite like the Feywild personally as a thing better than having this unseelie court in one realm and the seelie court in another. But then again, I think maybe this does keep telling us that the planes are not as separate as we see them. We're just humans, and that's how we see them, I guess, in some ways, because they are. You can walk from one to the other if you want to.
Absolutely, and not to toot our own horn per se, but when I first looked at it, because we did a really early episode of DM's book club, going through all the planes, and my big complaint at the time was like, there doesn't seem to be much on them. There's just like, here is the one thing about them, and some of the planes for me did merge a little bit. Like I know when we'll go into some of the planes of lore, there's one that's like it's an infinite battlefield, and I'm like, how is that different to Ysgard per se, and all that sort of thing. And we've definitely had that recently. Like sometimes I was like, it's Limbo and Pandemonium. I keep getting those two mixed up all the time. But actually, the way we're going through it in this order, I think, where it's almost like, the first one is, as we said, it's the abyss, and then we go to the other side of it, and it's like, and it actually seeing those contrasts has actually been really helpful for me, because then I can be like, it's different because of this and different because of that. And I think as well, whilst it doesn't really show up necessarily too much in 5th edition, obviously we've kind of mentioned briefly there are other pantheons, like some of the I think in Limbo, and I'm going to get this wrong now, there's some sort of stuff, deities from the Indian pantheon, there's stuff from the Egyptian pantheon, all sort of dotted around, and obviously Norse and Greek mythology as well. That doesn't really show up in 5th edition. It's all Forgotten Realm stuff, and actually, if you wanted to, you could easily just do away with sort of the westernized deities and stuff, and just find out more about these pantheons that aren't necessarily and treat them sensitively and with respect, and use those themes for it. It's actually it's more open to those things, and I hadn't really considered that before.
We meet the cat god in Pandemonium, don't we?
In Ysgard, I think it is.
Is it Ysgard? It's in Ysgard. It is in Ysgard. Sorry, that's next. I'm getting them.
That's next. That's spoilers for next time. But yes, I made a big note of that, because I was like, that's really interesting. So with that sort of briefly talked about, I'm going to skip ahead, because let's talk about politics very quickly. Politics. It's madness. There's no hierarchy. There's no necessary society. People are eking out, like living on the edge. Compared to like the Abyss, which does have a little bit of a hierarchy and stuff, in the sense of like there are demon lords, there are proxies there that are doing out the whim. You're going there to make a deal with demons. None of that here, because you are just basically if you're here, you've been exiled, you've been banished, so you're literally like your own authority, do what you want, because you're probably going to go mad at some point ASAP. So that's it for politics from me. I don't know if you had anything specific on politics at all.
I think it's just to add that there is the Bleak Cabal as a faction live there.
Of course, yes.
So they have the Madhouse, which is actually their town, but also their place in Sigil is the Madhouse as well. The sanatorium is called the sanatorium, and so they look after all the people who who need help. They aid lots of people, like health, not just mental health, but health in Sigil. So that's what they do, because their idea is that the world's going to end anyway, so there's no point to the universe. So you might as well just be nice.
Existence is madness. Is their motto.
But they're also like, if everything's doesn't mean anything, you might as well be good, which I think is quite a nice way of, at least they've got a positive side to it instead of being completely all downer. Sorry, go on. Oh no, and the other one was the city of Windglum, which we'll get onto, but that's the only other one that's got some sort of semblance of
organisation. And I was just going to quickly add about the madhouse stuff, because that's an interesting one as well. This idea is there's this big sort of sprawling citadel, and it's just been added onto extension after extension, wings that people get lost in. So even within the sort of the house itself, you get lost in it. So again, I was just like, oh, this would be a cool murder mystery in Pandemonium, but it's actually you're in a house and it's just haunted house and all that sort of thing. So that was me going, oh, this is really cool, because and now I'm going to forget what it's called, but there's a place in America where a lady went and built a house, and she kept adding wings and wings and wings of stuff.
Oh, right, yeah.
Like stairs that go to nowhere, doors that open, all that sort of thing.
Fantastic.
Because the ghost told her to do that, that sort of thing.
Oh, right, okay.
Again, it's like one of the most famous horror stories or haunted stories, and and you can still visit it today.
Oh, fantastic! Oh, I quite like that. That's really cool.
It's very, very cool, and of course I've completely forgotten what the name of it is, but Anyway, so that's what it reminded me of, the idea that the idea that you go up like some circular stairs, but it stops halfway, or there's a door that leads to nowhere.
Willy Wonka.
Oh, very Willy Wonka, but scarier. I don't know. Willy Wonka's scary, isn't it?
It is actually. Yeah, the bit when they're in the tunnel and it all goes crazy. It's one of my favourite bits in the movie. To be honest,
it's so good.
That original '70s Gene Close,
Wilder,
Gene Close. Yeah.
Are you thinking of Glenn Close?
That
Close also would be terrifying.
Yes, Gene Wilder is one of the best. That acting performance, is one of the best pieces of acting I think on television, on movies.
And you know what? He would be an amazing inspiration for a minor character in Pandemonium, right?
Totally.
Just the way he acts and stuff like that.
Yeah, very much on the level, but there's a subtle hint of the insane and the sort of creepy.
Something not quite
right.
Connected. Yeah. I love that as an inspiration, actually. That'd be really
perfect
cool.
sort of baddie. I think just to finalise it, I think this puts it very well. The Madhouse is hardly a model of order. The only reason it has a working central government is because, 1, it's small enough for the matron to keep track of, 2, she doesn't give too many orders, and 3, none of the locals are terribly interested in challenging her. So it's kind of like, and I think that's basically it, isn't it? That no one really cares, and you don't really have to ask for much, and that's it really.
Just get on with it. Yeah.
Just get on with it.
Yeah. No, fair enough. All right, so that's sort of politics. There is a little bit, I guess, within the factions. Of course, I forgot about the Bleak Cabal, but let's move on to magical conditions. So this is interesting, and we'll go into a big section on madness itself. But I love this idea that, again, like all the other planes, there's a magical nature about Pandemonium itself, but it's also with the physical nature of it. So it talks about, I called it alteration magic. I don't know if that's what it's called, but this idea that if you're transforming your image, it's slightly tainted by evil, or it smells foul, or something's again, like you said, not quite right. Conjuration, summoning magics don't work well on this plane, so wish spells don't really work. Divination, you get if you fail a
5
check.
familiar, limited wish, and wish do not work on this plane.
Yeah.
So if you're
you
stuck
can't get
here,
home.
you can't get home. But there's no way. Well, you can plane shift, but you can't wish yourself home.
You can't wish yourself home. Which, that's the thing, because you think, oh, surely I can get home. But yeah, I thought that was quite an interesting one to just sort of blanket remove, as it were. Divination magic is where, obviously, if you're trying to get information about something, if you fail it, and DMs do a secret roll, and if they fail at whatever, you get misinformation or misleading information, which I was like, whoa. I love that. It feels very much like paranoia, that sort of thing, you feeding this thing, but obviously being genuine about it, and you're like, wait, we've been going around for hours. You said there was like an exit. We just followed like left, right. Did I? Oh, whoops.
Is that what you heard?
Is that what you heard on the wind? And then the other final one for me, in terms of magical conditions, was that because you're so close to the nine hells and the abyss and that sort of thing, there's a surplus of necromancy and negative magic, but as a result it's much harder to generate life, so you can't necessarily heal as well. So that's a bit of a bugger as well. If you're trying to like, oh god, you've been hit by, I don't know, a giant slug, and you're like, oh no, acid. You're like, oh, but the magic's not working. It's not coming.
You must
and again,
make an intelligence test to make sure you can make a healing spell. But if you fail, you expend the spell slot.
Of course you do.
That's evil.
A lot of the planes have that though, don't they? They say, oh, you tried. Oh well, and yeah, that idea that you give out the magic and then it's taken away, which leads us quite nicely onto the physical nature of this. So as I sort of mentioned, this idea of the howling winds like pushing through and stuff like that. If you're trying to say stuff or cast spells, it's going to take your words and carry them away from you. So you've got to either get it out very quickly, as well as if you've got spell components, which I assume. Second edition, you were like, you need to have all the correct spell components. If you had them all like physically in your hand, the idea the wind could just rip them out of your hand, and you're like, oh so no, good. My scrolls, my little jar of dirt,
my back guano. That's all I think of. It's always the one. Bit of back guano. That's what Caleb's always talking about. It's just got.
Oh yeah. My back guano, no.
Then again, he is in a cave, so there'll be more back guano somewhere, I'm sure.
There must be. But again, the idea that you would make checks, but like if you're trying to do a spell, you have to make sure you can hold on to everything.
Yeah, dex check. Busy. And there's not many Dexy wizards out there, are there? To be honest. Oh
no. Could you imagine? Like they're too busy. Like I did all my book learning, not all my athletics, not all my acrobatic skills.
Power words don't work as well. Another high level spell that's always a good one to use and that you can't use. So that's.
The other one I quite liked was that it's incredibly difficult to conjure fire elementals, like pseudo elementals, because obviously there's no natural fire. So you feel like I've got a great idea. And it just flutters out or putters out even.
Yeah.
So yeah, really again. So but that's interesting, right? Going back to the idea that the big thing is like it's again storm. It's fucking windy, It's like. You're trying to fire is not going to work. You're going to be cold probably as the winds are biting into you and stuff. And just thought that was really interesting. That this idea that you got the magical stuff, but at the same time you have this physical thing of like, you want to do these spells, you got to do a test. You got to do something. So I quite like that as a 2-layer thing. It
is good fun, and I think those things, I always like this. Again, that whole immersion to the actual thing really just makes it different for the players, and it adds another level of like stratagem. That's what, exactly.
Again, it's that sort of place where I'd imagine again, Pandemonium is not a place you necessarily go to. It's somewhere where you probably could end up because you've been banished. So maybe you might not be able to prepare for it as well as you could. I know, and I'm sure I said this last episode, and I'm going to completely forget. I believe that Pandemonium is where they went to go find Grog.
Yes, you said this. Yeah, exactly.
I think that's the right plane. If I got it wrong, I'm so sorry. But
you said it like 20 times now, so it better be right.
Oh, I hope so too. But again, I think so because they had to shout across wind and stuff. But again, they had to prepare for it because they knew Grog was there. But if not, what are you going to do? It's
exactly
scary. But let's talk about madness. Let's talk about the big madness elephant.
I thought we were going to talk about the band Madness.
Madness, our house
in the middle of our street.
On Pandemonium. Right, cool. No, we've done our dance break. So, madness.
Yeah.
Put that as a gift. Madness. So one line I really loved in this book, it says, it's not much of a holiday hotspot. It's virtually uninhabited. It's desolate and deserted. And because of the wind, and because it's, like you said, it's that beating on you for so long, you, once per day, have to do a save. And it encourages GMs to do this at dramatic moments, to save against becoming mad. And it says, a little tiny paragraph says that there's no permanent recovery from it. So for example, if you stayed for a little while in Pandemonium and you did suffer, say, stage 2 of madness, went away, recovered your levels, came back, as soon as you're back at stage 2. You don't reset.
So you're not mad when you leave. You lose the madness from your personage.
The wind's not.
Yeah, but you get it back where you were. You go back to it. Wish doesn't cancel it out.
Nope.
Only a power can remove it.
Yeah. How scary is that? Like,
that's high. That's highbrow. It's high level.
Highbrow, but it sort of ties into this idea of, and again, it's an interesting topic that maybe beyond the scope of this podcast per se. But this idea of like, how do we role-play madness? Should we be role-playing madness? Should we be using topics like PTSD in our storytelling, so to speak? But I'll set that aside for now. We'll just talk about some of the mechanics of the 4-stage madness that you get with both things. So if you fail the first time, you get a level. The first level is frustration. So your character becomes sort of snappish, irritated by little things. You just want to move on rather than talk and plan, which I love as sort of the beginning elements of it, because we've all been there in those sessions where you're planning to get ahead, and you plan for ages and the plan goes wrong. Hate that. You just want to get on, and it's like that little bit of frustration. So that idea that you were saying that there's a drip of a tap, or there's a bird outside your window. It's slowly but surely sort of eroding away at you, at your sanity level, in the sense of like you're getting more and more stressed because you hate this place. You want to get out, right? And you get, I think it's a -1 to wisdom. Is it intelligence checks? It must be intelligence checks. Because you're like stressing out a little bit. So again, a nice sort of in-game mechanic there, because you've been affected by this. The next level is despair. So you feel completely helpless. Things, you won't do anything on your own initiative. You have to be pushed and there's sort of peer pressured into do it, and you have no real enthusiasm or for doing anything. And even in combat, you're sort of a bit apathetic about it, which I thought was great. I love that. This idea, like, oh, for fuck's sake, just like, fine, whatever. And I thought that was a really interesting one, because it's that sort of ties in with the last stage, I think, but that idea that you won't ever do anything of your own initiative. So you've gone from being like, oh, we need to move ahead, come on, let's go, and then you're like, well, what's the point? Ugh, fuck this, like, just like, we're stuck here, aren't we? Can't get out.
It's all fucking, what's the point?
Can't use Gary's wish spell. What's the point? Which I quite like. Third level is hysteria. Which you go back to that frantic energy of like you're trying to get away. You begin to run madly about, hooray! And you collapse, eventually exhausted. It's about how much you failed the save bys for how long per minute you are running about. So obviously, if you're in combat, that's a long time. That could be
basically the whole of combat. You're out.
That's the whole of combat. You're just running around, not doing anything, and then it says obviously you're trying to block out where you are, so you're closing your eyes and your hands over your ears, so you're going to be a big target in battle, and you can't do anything, you can't see anything, you're just running around wildly and stuff. And then if you do find sanctuary, if you find a little soft spot, you'll be very unwilling to leave and to go back out into the wind. And I think this is the one it sort of talks about, saying this is the hardest one to role play, and so it's that sort of thing. And again, we'll come on to this in a second, but this idea of like, it could be the most frustrating one if you're a group of players, if somebody has got the hysteria level. So again, having to just tread a little bit carefully, be like, hey guys, we're in Pandemonium, let's give each other the spotlight in general for storytelling, but also let's treat each other, let's not do the whole thing of it's what my character would do, because everyone has a sucky justification for anything, and I know I've used it for stuff as well, and it's not fun. But it's an interesting one to finally go to resignation. So you've come to terms with the howling, and you've learnt to ignore the anguish it causes, but it manifests in some other way. So this is where you get, it calls them quirks a little bit, but it's essentially a form of madness. And it's got a little table in the book, page 87 in the Planes of Chaos book, of examples you can have, and it ranges quite a lot. And it's interesting because, as I sort of mentioned at the beginning, it talks about, for players and for GMs, like, and I talked to you before about this off podcast, this idea that the madness rules and this whole sort of thing, where they're only a guide to role-playing character stuff in this environment. They're not a replacement for it. You should apply these rules as you, the GM, and the players see fit. Yeah. And I thought that was it was such a simple sentence, and it just really was like, that's amazing. Because again, as again, that's a topic I put off the table briefly. That's sort of the idea of using madness in our games. Obviously, we've got Call of Cthulhu that uses sanity points and all that sort of thing. It's like, should we be role playing mental health conditions and stuff? Whereas here, it's a guide. It is like, it's not necessarily oh, you're gonna get it's not like you're gonna get like you're a weak character now, you're completely crippled because you are mad in quotation marks. It's like, this horrible thing has happened to you, how do you deal with it, and how do other people respond to you for it? And I will say that the table itself has some really good suggestions for what kind of quirks or what kind of sort of little things you develop from getting to this final stage. I don't agree with all of them. As you know, it is, again, it's that sort of thing where it's of its time in the sense, but I think they're good to have it as a suggestion, and it has a great little suggestion. For example, the paladin at every campsite, they clean every little bit of their armor over and over again to make sure it's perfect. The rogue has their hand on their purse and looks over their shoulder every few seconds, even though they're relaxing. Little things like that, little quirks like that. I just thought that's more interesting than. Like I said, the accents quirk or the racist quirk and all that sort of thing.
That's exactly. There's a big problematic ones in there, but I think the other thing is it's like, as we've said a lot of time, and they've even said in there, which I think is really positive it's about having a conversation with your players beforehand about what you want to do, and also, you know, if you're not. Yeah, it's like, I don't really want to play Call of Cthulhu, mainly because of the sanity points, to be honest. It's something that puts me off it quite a lot. And so I probably wouldn't take, I probably wouldn't take people to Pandemonium just for that reason, to be honest. But also, there are, as you said, there's levels of how you play that, as you say. It could just be paranoia, couldn't it? It could be just what you take from it, which is, you know, it hasn't got to be madness in a sense. You know, you can. As with anything in any TTRPG, you can make it however you want to. These are always a guide, isn't it?
And that's the beauty of it, isn't it? And that's the thing. I think we were talking about this off podcast, this idea that sometimes, I'm not naming names or anything like that, but it does sometimes feel like, well, this has been written, so it shall be, and we shall never go against it. And I'm like, in role-playing games especially, and the lore and stuff, as you sort of asked me at the beginning, like, I was like, I can see the roots of where the 5th edition stuff lore has come from, but for me, I was like, it's sort of simplified, but if I want more, I now know where to go. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that if you want more, you can go there, and then you can be like, I really enjoy that little bit, I'm going to keep that in my game, or, well, I don't agree with that bit, so I'm not going to leave that game. And I think that's so important to do that and give people agency, and people don't do that. I think maybe they're scared to do that because they want to be true to the lore as it's been written, or they don't know what to do about it. But
I think that's it. I think it's sometimes when something's written, it feels written in stone, doesn't it? As they say, you know. And I think that there's that piece to it. But I think, and it only comes with confidence as being a GM and player and playing more of it. I think sometimes to know that, oh wait, I don't need to do that. You know, I don't need to do it as it's written. But there's always that fear, I think, isn't there? Some people that you need to do exactly what it says in the book because then people are going to question you or something like that, you know. And so I think there's I think it's
but even then, you know what's interesting, and again, just to give it back to Pandemonium, as we said, Pandemonium has the most GM advice, I think, for how to run this plane compared to the other planes. And also, I believe it's when we did the Factions of Sigil episode on our other podcast, it talked about how it was like, do what you want, don't worry about, like, this is how it is, but you can easily make things up, change things around and stuff like that, and it just gave you that interesting. And again, I was surprised as someone who isn't au fait with earlier editions of D&D. I was like, oh, they're very honest about, like, do what you want. And it's the same with Spelljammer as well. When we did that, it's like, hey, here's some ideas, if you don't like them, don't use them. And you know what it was, Spelljammer, because they said, hey, those monsters that you see in the monster manual, change the names of them or describe them differently, and the players would be like, oh, but we've not faced that before, and you're like, yeah, you have not faced that before, even though you know every single monster. It's a mimic. No, it's not, it's a mimic from space. I
think that's what I said to you, and I think I didn't like put it in a way. I think that the esoteric 2E seats, I have not read enough 3.5E or 3E or 4E at all.
Hey, you know what? We're not experts. Who knew?
No, exactly. But the only one that I've read a lot of is the 2E. But I think, and really, actually, these ones, Planescaper and Spelljam, are not actually the main settings for either of them. But they have a quality to them which I think is isn't very much like what everyone says. Old edition of D&D.
It's very weird, isn't it?
I think it's a very positive. There's a lot of positive messages in it. You know, like as I said, like there just is, and the quality of the writing and the sort of freedom it gives to DMs and GMs generally is really good. I don't know, there's something about them that just feels very interesting and very forward-thinking compared to what other people.
The tone of it's so different. But again, let's move it back to the planes.
We
could talk about it. No. I think just to end on it, on the final bit of the sort of the madness stuff. So one of the things it does as an advice for GMs is that for any NPCs or minor characters, any madness quirk that you sort of make up for them should be a lot more severe than any of the characters, player characters. And the reason for that is obviously twofold in a way. I see it as twofold. So one being that it's these characters have been there longer, so they're going to manifest the stuff more, and if it's a gradual realization for the player characters, that's quite a good bit of storytelling. But also it means that you can be the benchmark for your players. So you could be, I mean, not that I would encourage you to do any, go 100% for one of these of the not so good quirks, for example. But then you can be the judge of if somebody does start to roleplay something and you go, oh, hang on, time out, let's have a quick talk about it, because you can say, here's my benchmark, no one goes across that line. And I think that's very important. And
that's the Sessions era thing as well, isn't it?
Exactly.
And I think on that note, all the NPCs in this are given a madness to them as well that you can play. So the innkeep for the laughing mug.
The laughing mug
has always talks and questions.
What a great quirk! I
love
that.
A great one. Yeah.
I mean, as a GM, I'm like, oh my god, that's the worst thing in the world. But as a player, that's the most amazing thing.
That is so much fun, exactly. Yeah. As someone who plays that game on our show as well, again, I like that one. But it's just
I'm so bad at it.
It's a really hard one. But so it does give you and they're not. And as I said, they can be that sort of innocent. It's maybe a good word for it. It's just like it's a more Mad Hatter, more Alice in Wonderland down the rabbit hole. Actually,
I love that idea. Yeah, the Mad Hatter were like, well, we're all mad here, and it's just accepted, exactly. And you're the strange people for pointing it out. I like that as a thing. And just to go back to the population stuff briefly, I realised the one thing I did forget, apart from the sort of most people have a common sign of madness in quotation marks, is that they'll be physically adapted to the wind in some way. So maybe a little bit of clothing or like thin or bony is what they sort of described as. But also they are invisible to infrared vision.
Yes, they're so cold.
What? It's just like, what? That's terrifying. Again, I'm thinking proper The Descent vibes, where you're like looking around going, there's a creature behind you, like it's like hiding in there. So I quite like that. That is such an interesting mechanic that you might not ever discover. Like, I don't know how often you would. I mean, again, I say this as not knowing anything really about second edition. If everyone had dark vision and also infrared vision, I don't know. But I was like, ooh, I quite like that as a little thing.
Cool, actually. It is cool.
Do you want to quickly talk about Windglum?
Yes, I do.
We've completely skirted around it, and I'm like, before we end, we must talk about this little town. So please tell us, what is
Windglum? This little town. Yes. So if any town exists can be said to have a chip on its shoulder, Windglum is it. Its founders were said to have been banished this plane, and because of that, their descendants have a dim view toward all outsiders, and so they're very, very paranoid about outsiders. But they also have this belief that they can be greater than Sigil.
Sigil. Yeah. I know.
Which is which is actually in its way a sort of madness, because it's like you're going to be greater than the sort of center of the multiverse. Yeah. Or, well, that's questionable. I know people.
But I guess as a comparison thing, it's like I'm going to make the principality of Sealand the equivalent to the capital of London, and you're like, what? Don't be silly. Be like, but I believe it, so it's true.
No, and it's that sort of, and they have you can just imagine that sort of like really like snarky, sort of like, but like what's the word I'm looking for? Egotistical in a sense. There's not a better word for it, but they're all very much up themselves and believe in themselves and being great, but actually everything around them is actually sort of kind of falling apart and kind of crap in some ways, and I think that's kind of funny.
And I would even say they're egotistical, but not necessarily looking down on other people. They're paranoid of other people, but not looking down on other people.
No, but it's sort of just,
I love that.
But believing they're going to be great in some way.
We're going to do this. Yeah. And it's just like, are you sure? Yes, because we're great. Yeah, because there's it's sort of like, this person's completely mad. They can't see the reality of this thing. There's a different way to look at it.
So there's something kind of... I think that's quite... And the visual of it, the art of it is really great,
Yes.
and it just makes me think of Dark Souls. It's so Dark Souls,
Dark Souls,
or like Bloodborne, and I kind of like that sort of. You can imagine that sort of. That'd be a great setting for a Bloodborne sort of game. That sort of howling wind. It's got that sort of sense. Everyone's a little bit off kilter, and I think I'd sort of play it down a bit more that Dark Souls route, a little bit more like. Sort of like, it's a little bit off. Something's off, but it's normal, but it's not right. And you'd like be the first place you see on the horizon. You maybe don't know where you've been banished, and you get to this town, and it's howling winds, and you're like, where are we? And they're just like, oh yeah, go to the shop, and the shop is literally like full of, like they say, oh, have some food. And like, oh, we've got lots of great leeks, and for example, and in front of you, you don't see any leeks. There's nothing there, and they're just like. Yeah, that'd be £4 for £1. Yeah, but there's nothing here. What are you on about? They're right there. You know what I mean? Like, you could just have that and... I don't know.
It feels very much like, again, there's a South Park episode where they're all in character in a historical town, but then there's like, there's a hostage situation, but they all have to remain in character as the historical village. So I like that idea that everyone has to still be in character, even though you're like, but there isn't anything there. It says, you got to play along. Don't let them, that sort of thing going, you have to play along. That's a scary thing. For me, I really enjoyed the origin story of the mayor, who was a native to Pandemonium, who went on the travels, and then, as it sort of talks about it, sang a bawdy song about an evil sorceress who was like, I will banish you to Pandemonium. It's like, oh, great, back home I go. Like,
yeah, exactly.
And that idea of, he's the one that's sort of pushing forward, like, we will be as great as Sigil. And you're like, are you sure? Like that's quite a. I love that. It feels very business person about it. But he's the one out of there's him and the innkeeper who are the most likely to engage with outsiders in the sense of he's willing for people to test their metal and be like, okay, you've come here, show me what you've got. That sort of like that attitude, and then dismiss them. But then, as another great tavern named the Scaly Dog, where there's an innkeeper there who has been there a while but hasn't got this sort of paranoid view of outsiders yet, so it's still quite welcoming. But it may be just a little, but the madness is still sort of manifesting in itself. So I quite like that as a point that not. Because otherwise, I feel like if you're going to have all these residents who hate outsiders, again, could be quite tropey, quite be stereotypical, but also your players were like, well, we fucking hated him.
Exactly.
Nobody's nice to us, so...
Yeah. No, I do. Yeah, it's good. And actually, a book that we haven't mentioned that we realised recently that came with this setting is the Travelogue. So there's a whole bit about the Scaly Dog in there, and it's got like a map and stuff, and you can see a lot more on this. And actually, it's worth noting for all of these that Travelogue has some good adventure hooks in there as well for things which are quite fun. I read one for Arborea about getting caught up in a back-a, which is quite.
Oh yes, the big party as it's
the big party. But how it like they're trying to go. You find out that they want to go to where you want to go, and then you see them destroy a town by just eating and drinking and like fighting through it, and you go, "Oh crap, we don't want them to come with us." Sort of thing. No. It's like the whole point is about trying to stop them doing it. So it's quite fun. So yeah, it's worth checking that out.
I'll check that out. And the final thing I want to say about Windglum. Okay. And it's such a silly thing, but the idea that anything you purchase is reported to the city guard because they don't trust you. And I just love that. That's that level of, again, it's just, and the reason I keep saying sort of paranoia is because I've recently played a game of paranoia. I ran the game Paranoia where you are friend computer. And what's interesting about this, if you've never played it, is that instead of cooperative role play, and we're a band of adventurers going together, it's competitive in the sense of you snitch on your other players for stuff. Like, it doesn't really do anything, but it gives that sort of dystopian Monty Python-esque vibes. So, for example, in the quick game that I played, they're all playing infrared, which is the lowest of the low troubleshooters, and they're going on a mission. But they get to the corridor, and it clearly says only people with red clearance can go down. So they turn to their red clearance leader and go, "Wait, should we go down here? Well, we need to follow the mission briefing, so we should go down there." And there was a moment where my players were going, "But we're not high enough clearance," and I was like, "Well, you need to go down there." And they're like, "Okay." So they start going down there. And then I go, "Friend computer, I've just spotted some infrared people in a red clearance corridor." And I snitched on them. And they were like, I can't believe you did that. They were so angry of that. But that's the thing, and that's what I want. I would love, if I was playing Windglum, the idea that you're always snitching on people on the outside because they're doing something. Oh, they bought some leaks. How could they? You know, those are our leaks. You know, they have, you know, even though there isn't any leaks, you know. So just the levels of stuff you can do with that, just really focusing on those small details, I think would be amazing.
That's cool. That is cool. No, is that everything on Pandemonium?
Yeah, I believe so. The only final thing, I know I keep saying that, one last thing, I turn around like Columbo.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to mention again the sort of optional rule for 5th edition. So obviously we talked about madness in the sort of 2nd edition. It's slightly different in 5th edition. So the idea is that when you you make the wisdom saving throw, each hour you spend there, not each day. And what happens is that you just gain a level of exhaustion, which reaches to level 6. But you don't die if you get the next level. You just get that form of madness, and that's it. And finishing a long rest doesn't affect you until you leave Pandemonium. Right. So it's different, but you know, you get into level 6 exhaustion mechanically is not great. You can't move. You can't really do anything. You're stuck there, you know. And then you get the madness quit. Whereas I think the 2nd edition sort of stuff, it's like, okay, it's more role play. There is some minuses to it, but I don't know, it gives you more open things. So I just thought that was quite interesting how they just kind of, it feels more crunchy, I guess, but then it's easy to get rid of it. Like you had that indefinite form of madness, but you if you come back to Pandemonium, you just regain the levels of exhaustion again. It's not like a reset. So that was the only last thing I was going to say. It was like slightly different. So,
I hadn't read that bit, so that's very good. Okay, cool.
But Hamilton, that we've done Pandemonium. I've sort of howled, word vomited at you, like with the big slugs coming through the Pandemonium tunnel. What are we looking at next time? What are we
looking at next time?
What is our final plane?
The final plane of chaos is the glorious glories of Isgard.
Glorious glories of Isgard.
Beer halls and Oktoberfest that it is. And it just never ending. As you can tell, there's a lot of interesting stuff, but you'll find out my thoughts on Isgard next time.
Oh, I can't wait. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of DM's Travel Book Club. As always, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, catch up on previous episodes and VODs of our sibling show, the DM's Book Club, and see some links. We'll probably put some links around various bits of it. And enjoy Pandemonium, I guess.
Enjoy Pandemonium.
You can never leave. That sort of like Royston Vasey type things. Like, you belong here. So
you belong here. Welcome to Windglum.
Welcome to Windglum. We hate you. Of course. Are you local? I can't believe.
Oh my gosh! Are you local? Is Windglum perfect?
Sorry, again, yet another UK niche reference.
Very UK niche reference.
Of League of Gentlemen, of Royston Vasey. Are you local? There you go. What a great way to end off. Thank you so much for watching, listening to DM Channel.
Everyone.
See you next time.
See you next time. Bye.